Well, good evening, everyone. This is Gerald McKeegan, and I'm your host for the Chabot Space and Science Center's Sky This Month program. So I'm coming to you from the Chabot Space and Science Center. In fact, as you can see behind me here, I'm in one of the exhibit areas, and we have quite a few exhibit areas here at the Chabot Space and Science Center. Of course, right now, Chabot is closed because of the pandemic, but we are continuing to function, providing a lot of the virtual programming like what you're watching now. We also have a lot of other virtual programs, not only at nighttime on Friday nights, but also a virtual telescope program every Saturday night. And we have virtual programming during the week for schools and also for members and the public. So lots still going on here at Chabot Space and Science Center. And in order to continue to provide that, we do need your support. Since our museum is not open right now, we don't have the revenue that we would normally get. So we want to encourage you to help us out by donating. You'll see a donate button on the Facebook page if you're watching us from there. You can also go to Chabot's website, chabotspace.org, and you will see a donate button at the top of the page there. So, either way, if you can take a minute to help us out with a little donation, we would really appreciate it. Also, if you have an employer or someone you know who owns or runs a business that does donations to nonprofits, we would certainly encourage them to take a look at the Chabot Space and Science Center and try to help us out in whatever way they can. We really would appreciate it. So we're going to get started tonight. We are going to do a little presentation about the sky tonight, what you would see if you went outside, say around 9:30 tonight, the constellations that you'll see. And that will be in a video presented to you by Don Saito, narrated by Doug Olson. And then afterwards, I'm going to do a little talk about a few other constellations that are up, tell a little story about it. And then we're going to take questions and try to answer them. So if you do have questions that come to mind during the program, please feel free to post them either on the Facebook page or on the YouTube page, and we'll do the best we can to answer them. So I'm going to get started now with our video. Again, this is a video that's produced by Don Saito. Don is a longtime Chabot volunteer. He's also a member of the East Bay Astronomical Society, and he's been very active with our telescopes and so on. And during the pandemic, he's been kind of changed hats, and he's now a video producer. So he's been producing all of these videos that we've been showing during our Sky This Month programming. Tonight's video is going to be narrated by Doug Olson, who is also another one of our Chabot volunteers. And so I'm going to go ahead and get that started here if I can. Bear with me for just a second. I'm not the most technically competent individual, so let's see if we can get this going here. I think we got it.
Greetings, fellow Earthlings. Even as the COVID-19 pandemic appears to be winding down, we're still not quite to the point where we can safely meet inside our amazing Zeiss Planetarium at the Chabot Space and Science Center. However, we can always use nature's planetarium, also known as the real sky, to step outside, tilt our heads back, and see at least some of the amazing things I'll be pointing out for you tonight. I am, of course, talking about the constellations. There are people, animals, and objects up there in the night sky. They've been there for millennia, but most people are unaware of them as they glide by unnoticed right over our heads every clear night. Tonight, we will amend this sad state of affairs and put you, the audience, on your first steps towards astronomical enlightenment. The Earth has 4 seasons: spring, summer, fall, and winter. Well, the constellations also have seasons, having to do with the Earth's yearly orbital path around the Sun. I want you to think about that for a moment. The constellations have seasons too. Just realizing this fully can help make knowing the constellations easier. We can only see stars by looking away from the sun at night, which changes our view of the stars as the Earth makes its orbit around the sun throughout the year. Unfortunately, unless you're at a good dark sky site, and if the moon isn't too bright, most constellations will be somewhat hard to see fully. But most constellations have at least a few bright stars to help identify them, and the better your viewing location, the more you'll be able to see. A good first step to finding the constellations is done by knowing your compass directions. We can easily do this without a compass using a star grouping that is quite easy to see and most everyone knows, the Big Dipper. If you don't know the Big Dipper, have someone who does point it out for you. Around this time of year, the Dipper is face down, but it's still easy to see with its curving handle and bowl. Take special note of the two stars at the end of the bowl. These are called the pointers, because if you take the distance between them and extend that distance out about 5 times, they point to this semi-bright star here. Now, Polaris is the only star in the entire sky that stays pretty much right where it is. So no matter what time of night it is, or even what month of the year it is, if you're located anywhere north of the Earth's equator, all you need to do is face it, and you'll always be facing due north, with east directly to your right, west directly to your left, and south directly behind you. All the other stars wheel around this pivot point anti-clockwise, making them appear to rise in the east and set in the west. This is, of course, an illusion caused by the Earth's rotation, which gives the appearance that the stars are moving when, in fact, it's the Earth that's spinning. If you think of the Earth as a spinning top, and you extend Earth's north polar axis straight up into the sky, it points almost directly at Polaris. Using Polaris, we found all the compass directions, but Polaris is also the end of the Little Dipper's handle, whose official name is Ursa Minor, the Little Bear, and our next constellation. It's a bit faint, but from Polaris you might be able to trace its curving handle to its bowl. The two brighter stars at the end of its bowl are called the Guardians, because they seem to march around the North Star like protective sentries throughout the night. Now, you probably didn't notice that I called the Little Dipper, also known as Ursa Minor, the Little Bear, a constellation, while earlier I called the Big Dipper a star grouping. Isn't the Big Dipper a constellation too? No. The Big Dipper is what we astronomers call an asterism, which is different from an actual constellation. The Big Dipper is only part of the constellation Ursa Major, the Great Bear, as seen here. He's totally upside down from this view, but here's what he looks like right side up. As you can see, the end of the so-called Big Dipper's handle is his nose. The Dipper's curving handle is the back of his neck, and the Dipper's bowl is like a saddle on the bear's back. Got it? Good. To continue, let's turn our view to the south, like so. This will flip everything we've seen so far upside down, and will enable us to find the rest of the night's major constellations more easily. Arcing relatively high above the southern horizon is a kind of invisible line where all the zodiacal constellations can be found. This line is called the ecliptic, and is also where the sun, moon, and planets move. This is why the zodiacal constellations were so significant to astrologers. Not that astronomy scientists believe in the pseudoscience of astrology. Most do not. But astrologers were some of history's first astronomers, and for their early work we are in their debt. Going from left to right, or from east to west on the ecliptic, our first zodiacal constellation for April is Virgo, the Virgin. Most of her stars are pretty faint, and her overall shape is pretty rough as an approximation of a woman lying down. But she has a head, one arm pointing up, a body, 2 legs, and of course her shiny rump star, Spica. To the right, or west of Virgo, we have Leo the lion. He's got a head, a neck with a mane, body, legs, and a tail. Located in his front foot, Leo's brightest star is called Regulus, and it's the 22nd brightest star in the sky. To the west of Leo, we find the zodiacal constellation Cancer, the crab. Unfortunately for Cancer, it is quite faint, and unless you're at a fairly good dark sky site with no moon, you'll never find it. As you can see from the illustration, it's a very simple constellation made up of a kind of squashed rectangle with a couple of sticks coming off the top, which are meant to be the crab's arms. Not too impressive, but this constellation does contain a very pretty deep sky object, M44. In just a bit, I'll describe how to find M44, but first we've got to find another zodiacal constellation. To the west of Cancer, we find Gemini, the twins. This constellation is one of the easier ones to see, as it is composed of fairly bright stars that make up their heads, arms, bodies, and legs. The two brightest stars in this constellation are the twin brothers' heads, Pollux on the left and Castor on the right. Now to find M44, the beehive, draw an imaginary line from Regulus in Leo to the closer twin's head, Pollux. Just a bit past and below the center of that line, you'll find M44. It's in the upper right part of Cancer's head. Check it out with a pair of binoculars if you get the chance. It's actually quite pretty. To the west of the twins, and our last zodiacal constellation at this time, is Taurus the bull. He's got a big, somewhat triangularly shaped head, two horns, front and back legs, a body, and a tail. Unfortunately, you won't be able to see the back end of his body, as it's already set below the horizon. But I had to mention him because he has the only planet visible to the naked eye in the night sky, orange Mars, located between his left horn and the tip of his nose. By the time you watch this, NASA's recently landed rover, Perseverance, will have driven to a designated flat and level space to deploy and launch history's first helicopter on another planet. It's not supposed to happen before April 8th, so if we're lucky, by the time you hear this, maybe we'll get to watch it happen as it happens. Cross your fingers. Leaving the ecliptic, I have saved the best for last, Orion the Hunter. This constellation is composed of the most bright stars of all the other constellations from both the Earth's northern and southern hemispheres, and is known by most people in the world. He's got a little tiny head, broad shoulders. He's holding aloft a somewhat faint club in one hand, while his other holds forth a shield. Then there's his famous belt of 3 stars, a sword hanging from his belt, and his legs and feet. If you look closely at his sword of 3 stars, you'll notice the middle star looks a bit fuzzy. Take another look with a pair of binoculars, and you'll see it's not a star at all, but a fuzzy little smudge. A look at even greater magnification with a telescope will reveal a cloud with striations and details. This is the great nebula in Orion, a place where new stars are being born, a sort of stellar nursery, if you will, and as you can see, quite beautiful. Our last 2 constellations for the night are Orion's dogs, Canis Major, the great dog, and Canis Minor, the little dog, which I figure must be a wiener dog because it's just 2 stars, though one of the stars is Procyon, the 9th brightest star in the sky. Not to be outdone, Canis Major has the brightest star in the entire night sky, Sirius, the dog star. The ancient Egyptians used to use the first sight of this star as a notice for the annual flood of the Nile and for when to plant crops. And that's it. There are other smaller or fainter constellations out there, which I encourage you to look for using a good book and maybe a pair of binoculars too. Speaking of good books, I cannot more highly recommend the book The Stars, A New Way to See Them by the author H.A. Rey, whom you may know as the same author who wrote the Curious George books. Rey was a scientist who wasn't satisfied with the way modern star charts were being drawn. The astroscientists were not interested in the characters or the objects or the stories behind the constellations, so for convenience they just connected the brighter stars into weird geometric shapes, slapped on their Greek names, many of which would mean nothing to the common person, and left it at that. That's all well and good for them, but for us regular folks, we're more interested in the fun stuff. If you really want to learn the constellations, get Rey's book, which can be purchased from Amazon for about $18. I'd also recommend getting a pair of binoculars before getting a telescope. Binoculars are cheaper and easier to use, and there are many wonderful deep sky objects that can actually be best seen with just a pair of binoculars. They are noted in Ray's book. If you do want to get a telescope, ask us or research on the web how to make an informed purchase. Be warned, there are a lot of bad telescopes out there with cheap components and shaky, muddy, fuzzy views that will disappoint you every time. A good scope will inspire you and your children to a lifetime of deep space exploration and an appreciation of science and nature in general. If you're interested in getting into the hobby of astronomy, joining a local astronomy club can be most helpful. Chabot is partnered with the EAS, the East Bay Astronomical Society, which has many activities and resources you'll find essential to help you get started in this amazing and beautiful study of our natural universe. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked this content, be sure to click the thumbs up button, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell notification icon to find out when new content has been uploaded. This will really help our channel to grow, which would make us all very happy. And until we meet again, we'll see you in the future!
All right. Well, that was fun. A couple of things I want to comment. First of all, in the video, Doug was talking about the Ingenuity helicopter on Mars. And when this video was produced about a week and a half ago, the plan was for the helicopter to fly around April 8th. So it would have already flown by now. But as it turns out, NASA had to delay that a little bit because they needed to make sure the batteries were fully charged on the helicopter. The helicopter had been parked or actually attached underneath the underside of the Perseverance rover, and it had to be set down on the ground, and the Perseverance rover had to move out of the way. Then there's some solar cells on top of the Ingenuity helicopter, and they had to charge the batteries before they were ready to fly. And then they had to make sure that everything was ready to go and everything, all the programming was done. The helicopter is not being controlled from the Earth. It is going to fly autonomously because of the long time it takes for a radio signal to go to Mars and then come back to Mars. It's not possible to control it automatically or manually. So what they have to do is they have to send a programmed flight to the rover, basically program it to fly a certain way, and then just hope it all works out. So that's going to happen now. Right now it's scheduled for the 3rd about 3 o'clock in the morning on April 11th. That's 3 o'clock in the morning, our time. Eastern time. So that's about right around just after midnight, our time, early Sunday morning, the 11th. So if you want to stay up really late and watch it, NASA TV will be covering it. So check that out. Now, in the video, they talked about several constellations in the night sky, but they didn't talk about all of them. And there were a couple of constellations that I wanted to talk about in particular because there's a really cool story that's associated with it. So if you'll bear with me for just a second here, I'm going to bring up a PowerPoint image and tell you a little story here that goes along with these other, if I can get it to go here. There we go. Okay, so this is the night sky. This is basically the southern sky as you would see it if you were standing outside tonight at around, say, 9:30, 10 o'clock and looking to the south. This is the sky that you would see. Now, in the video, they talked about a couple of the constellations that you see here. Virgo, he talked about, and Leo, he talked about. But the ones I want to talk about are these constellations right here. I'm hoping you can see my cursor here. These three constellations right here. Those constellations are Corvus, Crater, and Hydra. And there's a cool story about these constellations that I wanted to relate to you. Now, there are many stories about constellations in the night sky, and they often involve characters from Greek mythology or other mythologies. And this is no exception. And there are several versions of the story that I'm about to tell you, but I'm going to tell you the one that I like the most. It has a nice little moral for the kids if you want to share it with the kids. So I'll just dive right in, I guess. So one of the gods of Greek mythology was the god Apollo. Apollo was the god of the sun and of light. He was also the god of truth and ethics. He was the son of Zeus. He was the sister of Artemis, who was also known as Diana. And like I say, he was the god of sun and light. And he was also, most importantly for this story, the god of truth and ethics. Now, Apollo had a pet. His pet was Corvus, the crow. And in those days, crows looked very different and sounded very different than they do today. Corvus the crow had silver feathers, beautiful silver feathers. And also, he had a very beautiful song. His bird song was so beautiful that people just would stop and listen and be mesmerized by the beauty of the crow's bird song. So one day, Apollo was thirsty and he decided to send Corvus the crow to get him some water from a nearby stream. So he told Corvus to get himself a cup, which we call Crater, the cup, and head over to the stream and get him some water. So Corvus took the cup and headed out towards the stream along a path. And as he was walking along, he passed a fig tree. And he looked up into the fig tree and he saw that the figs were almost ripe. And there was lots of figs up there. And they looked just so delicious that Corvus decided to stop and wait for the figs to ripen. Well, eventually the figs ripened and Corvus ate his fill. And he was very happy until he realized he was supposed to be getting water for Apollo. So he quickly grabbed the cup and he raced to the stream and he dipped the cup into the stream. And then he realized, I'm going to be in big trouble when I get back to Apollo because I'm so late. What do I do? And just then he spies a water snake, Hydra the water snake, in the stream. So he gets an idea. And he quickly grabs the water snake in his claws, takes the water snake and the cup full of water, and heads back to Apollo. When he gets to Apollo, he makes up a story. He lies. He tells Apollo that the reason he's late is because when he got to the stream, he was attacked by the water snake. And that's what caused him to be delayed and take so long to bring the cup of water to Apollo. Well, you remember, Apollo was the god of truth and ethics, and he wasn't buying this lie at all. So to punish Corvus the crow, he decided to throw the crow up into the night sky. And behind the crow, he threw the cup, Crater the cup. And then he threw the water snake, Hydra the water snake. and he threw them all up into the sky in such a way that the cup was just out of reach for Corvus. So Corvus the crow would never be able to quench his thirst from the cup in the night sky. But he didn't stop there. Remember those silver feathers that I told you about? Apollo changed those feathers to black as midnight. And that beautiful bird song that the Corvus the crow had, Apollo changed it to this irritating, raspy, cawing sound. And ever since then, that's how we see crows when we see them flying around. They're all black as midnight. And when we hear their voices, it's just this irritating caw. And that's all because Corvus dilly-dallied along the way on his errand to fetch water, and then he lied about it. So that's the really cool story about Corvus and Crater and Hydra, one of many stories in Greek mythology that have made their way into the night sky. Okay, so now is the time for you, if you've got some questions you want to ask about anything astronomical, now's a good time to do it. Behind the scenes here, we've got Richard Osier. Richard is the president of the East Bay Astronomical Society, and he's doing the background work for us tonight. And he's the one who's going to be reading questions to us from either from Facebook or YouTube, whichever platform you're using. Go ahead and write your questions, and we'll do the best we can to answer them. So, Richard, do we have any questions coming in?
Well, people think that story about Corvus and Hydra was pretty cool.
Yeah.
And but so far, no questions per se.
Yeah, I used to tell that story to my daughter. She thought.
Yeah, I could tell. Actually, I was sitting here thinking Gerald used to tell that to his daughter.
Yeah.
It sounds like you had a lot of practice.
Yep. Not that you learned anything from it, but.
You can always hope.
Yeah. So again, folks, if you've got any questions about anything that's going on in the night sky.
Yeah, we do have one. Erica asks, which planets can we view in the spring? Which I think is a great question.
Well, right now, the only planet that's up and easily viewable, not real easily viewable, but it's up and can be seen, is the planet Mars. Now, there are some other planets that are in the night sky that are too far away for us to see with the naked eye. But later on in the spring, if you want to stay up really late at night, you'll be able to see Saturn and Jupiter. They are right now early morning planets, but over the course of the next few months, they will get higher and higher in the sky, and eventually they will be late evening planets, so you'll be able to view those. So that's something to look forward to.
What else we got tonight? Anybody else have questions?
There was one other thing I wanted to mention while we're searching for questions here. There's an asteroid, a newly discovered asteroid that's going to make a close approach tomorrow, the 10th of April. It's going to come fairly close to the Earth. In fact, it will be closer to the Earth than the geosynchronous satellites that orbit the Earth. You know, the geosynchronous satellites all orbit the Earth in a kind of a conga line around directly over the equator at about 22,000 miles away. This asteroid is only going to be about 16,000 miles away, so it's going to be pretty close, but it's a very small asteroid. It's only about 4 or 5 meters across, so about the size of a minivan. And an asteroid that small does not present a hazard to us. It would burn up in the atmosphere if it were to enter the atmosphere. Fortunately, this one's going to pass us nice and close, but safely whiz on by and go back out into space.
We do have a question. What other objects are visible in the night sky right now other than the Orion Nebula, which is kind of the obvious bright spring object? So Maybe some of the brighter Messier objects or
Right.
anything along those lines.
The first one that comes to mind is M3, the globular star cluster. You do need a small telescope to see that. Sometimes you can see it in a pair of binoculars, but a small telescope would be the best choice. And in fact, there are a couple of other globular star clusters that are up as well. M3 is very close to the star Arcturus, which is a bright star that will be in the eastern sky around 10 o'clock or so at night. So that would be a really interesting object to look for. There are some galaxies up, but you need a good telescope to see those. M51 is up, M81 and M82 are up, but those are fainter objects where you need a good sized telescope to see them. But the globular star cluster M3 is nicely positioned around 10 o'clock tonight, so that's something to check out. Globular star clusters are like balls of stars out in space. They're somewhere around anywhere from 10,000 to about 30,000 light years away. There's quite a few of them, about 150 of them around the Milky Way galaxy. And each of them has several 100,000 stars in them. And those stars orbit around the center of the cluster. And then the cluster orbits around our galaxy in a region called the halo of the galaxy. So for the Milky Way galaxy, it's kind of a flat disk with spiral arms in the disk, and then there's a central bulge in the middle of the disk. All around all of that is a kind of a spherical shell. It's a very diffuse region where there are much older stars, and that's where all of the globular star clusters reside. They orbit around the Milky Way. They're not in the spiral arms, but they do orbit around the Milky Way, and they are gravitationally bound. And they're some of the first stars to have formed when the Milky Way was forming 11, 12 billion years ago. So
Couple more questions. Oh, I want to mention that for those of you that are interested in finding Messier objects using binoculars or a telescope, there's a great book called Turn Left at Orion. If you search for that, it has very easy to follow star maps that actually work pretty well in bright city areas as well, for star hopping to the brighter Messier objects. So it's called Turn Left at Orion. I always have to think about that. I say I got a 50% chance of getting the title right. I say, is it Turn Left at Orion or Turn Right at Orion? But it's Turn Left at Orion. Rich Taylor, how you doing? You're asking, is Chabot open yet for limited visitors? Actually, we're not open to the public at all right now. There are certain groups that have reserved parts of Chabot for things like weddings or small meetings. So it's by reservation only right now, and you can contact the events coordinator if you're interested in having an event at Chabot for a small number of people. But we're not yet open to the public. Hopefully that will change in the fall. Another question from Rich. Which magnification of binoculars is useful for backyard viewing of nearby astronomical bodies such as the moon?
Yeah. I use a pair of binoculars most often that has a magnification of 8x, but a lot of people like the 10x binoculars as well. Either 8x or 10x with either, say, somewhere around 40 to 50 millimeter front aperture on the binoculars. Those are probably the easiest to use. They're the lightest in weight. And so that's what a lot of astronomers use when they're using binoculars. If you can get larger binoculars with more magnification, but they're heavier and they're harder to handle, and you often need a heavy-duty mount in order to use those. But the Bushnell 8x42s that I have, very easy to hold in your hand, very easy to look around, and they give you some pretty darn good views.
Yeah, once you get past 10x50s, the weight issue becomes a little bit of a problem. Right. You have to get, like a monopod or a tripod or some way to support them, or else it just becomes annoying to use. I
Yeah,
tend to use 10 by 50s myself, but that's about the limit.
one of the things that most people don't realize, when they get a pair of binoculars and they use the binoculars and it's got the little wheel on it for focusing and so on. But one of the things they don't realize is on the front of the binoculars, you'll usually see what looks like a little button, and quite often has the manufacturer's emblem on it. And if you turn that button, you find that it unscrews, and there's a screw hole there. And that screw hole is actually there for you to attach your binoculars to a mount, like a monopod or a tripod mount. You need to buy a little extra fixture to do that, but those are readily available in camera shops and astronomy shops and so on. It makes it much easier to use the binoculars and keep them steady while you're viewing the night sky.
Great. All right. What else have we got? Anything else tonight? We do have another. What's the best way? A couple moon questions. What's the moon phase now and in a week? And what's the best way to track moon phases in general? Google Calendar? Is there a site you like to use?
The moon phase right now is waning crescent. In fact, I think we're 2 days away from, or 2 or 3 days away from new moon. And there are a number of ways of keeping track of the phases. Of course, going outside and looking at the moon, seeing what phase it is one way. A lot of calendars, wall calendars, will have little symbols on them that show you what the main phases are, full moon and new moon and first quarter and last quarter and things like that. There are numerous apps out there that can show you what the phase is. There's even little widgets. If you've got your own website, there are a number of moon phase widgets that you can get and put on your website to show you what the phase is. You can also go to the Chabot Space and Science Center website and go to our weather page, and I believe there's a moon phase widget there as well. So lots of different ways of getting that information. If you subscribe to an astronomy magazine, there is a magazine called Astronomy. It's a monthly magazine. There's another one called Sky and Telescope. Those two magazines are very popular with amateur astronomers, and they always list what the phases are during the week. And I don't know about Astronomy magazine. I do know that Sky and Telescope puts out an annual big fold out that shows all the positions of the planets and things throughout the year, including all the phases of the moon. So you can use that as well. So lots of different ways of determining what the moon phases are.
We have another question. The answer to it depends on how you phrase the question and what your perspective is. So I'll let you pick which answer you'd like to give. And the question is what is the brightest star? So of course we're not necessarily talking about intrinsically brightest star, but maybe we are. Nope. Is it the brightest star at night? Is it the brightest star in the daytime? I'll let you answer.
Okay. All right. So for us, the brightest star that we see in the night sky with our naked eye is the star Sirius, which happens to be up tonight. Sirius is found in the constellation Canis Major. If you can find the constellation Orion in the night sky, which is one of the easier constellations to view, down and to the left of Orion is a very bright star, and that is the star Sirius. Sirius is a type A star, I believe, and it is about 8 light years away. It's actually a binary system, so it has a very small white dwarf star that's orbiting around it. You can't see it with your naked eye because it's so close and it's so small and dim. But it's actually 2 stars orbiting around each other. But the bigger one, the brighter one, is what we call Sirius A, and it is considered to be the brightest star in our night sky? So that would be the answer I would normally give. There are many stars out there that are actually intrinsically much brighter than Sirius. Another star that's up tonight, which won't look bright to you, but is in fact much brighter than Sirius, is the supergiant star Betelgeuse in the Orion constellation. Betelgeuse is about 720 light years away, so it's much farther away than Sirius is. But if Betelgeuse was the same distance away as Sirius, it would be way brighter. Mm-hmm. And the reason for it is not because it's hotter than Sirius, but because it's so much bigger. Sirius is maybe 2 times the diameter of our sun. Betelgeuse is 1,000 times the diameter of our sun. So even though its surface is cooler in temperature, it's so big, it has so much surface area to radiate light that it would be just a really bright star if it was 8 light years away instead of 720 light years away. And it's not the brightest star in the night sky either. So there are stars out there that are even brighter than Betelgeuse. But because they're so far away, we don't see them as being very bright. So long answer, but it's the best I can do.
Of course, I would give the oddball answer and say, oh, the brightest star we see is the sun.
Well, okay.
We have a couple more questions. Are there any nearby stars that are capable of generating a gamma ray burst that we know of?
Gosh. I don't know any off the top of my head, but that gamma ray burst is usually a pretty energetic event, and you don't want to be very close when that happens. So fortunately, I think the answer is
no.
No, there are no nearby stars. A gamma ray burst might be the result of a supernova explosion or some other really catastrophic event that produces a sudden burst of gamma rays. Now, gamma rays are being produced inside the sun as we speak, but because they are being produced down at the core of the sun, by the time those gamma rays work their way out to the surface of the sun, they've bounced around and been absorbed and re-emitted and absorbed and re-emitted so many times, they're no longer gamma rays. They're just infrared or visible light rays. But they start out as gamma rays.
Well, thanks. We can cross gamma ray bursts off our list of things to worry about for the moment.
Yeah, they do happen. We do detect them from time to time.
Well, if there's a large supernova, sometimes there's associated gamma rays, and then there's gamma rays from black holes and all kinds of other massively energetic events in the universe, and mostly those are very far away.
And an interesting story about gamma rays. Back in the late 1960s, after the United States and the Soviet Union signed some test ban treaties, there had to be a way for them to verify that each party was complying with the test ban, which basically it was a ban on above ground testing of nuclear weapons. And so the way the United States decided to do that was to put satellites up that would be able to detect gamma ray radiation, because a nuclear explosion produces a lot of gamma rays. And so they were thinking they put these satellites up, and if the Soviet Union or anybody else detonated a nuclear bomb above ground, these satellites would detect the gamma rays and they'd know right away. So they put these satellites up there, and all of a sudden they're detecting gamma rays all over the place. And for a while there, nobody knew quite what was going on. And that's when we realized that there were all these events going on way out in space that produced bursts of gamma rays. And they were perfectly normal events, had nothing to do with nuclear weapons. And so that's how we basically discovered that there was gamma ray bursts occurring out in space. ever since then, we've been studying them and trying to understand what causes them. And, fortunately, by the time they reach us, they've become so weak that they're not a threat to us. But you don't want to be close to any event that produces a gamma ray burst. Gamma rays are the most powerful energy there is, and they're not healthy for normal.
They will do a lot of damage, so stay away from them. We did have a question. I'm actually going to edit this question a little bit and make it a little more general. Maria was wondering what effects have humanity had with respect to like pollution and industry on outer space. And my immediate answer to that is, well, space is really vast and infinite and doesn't really get affected by human activity too much. But the space immediately around our planet does get affected by human activity, namely in two ways. The first is we tend to generate a lot of space junk with all of the satellites that we send up in orbit around the Earth, and it becomes a challenge, an increasing challenge for space agencies all around the world to be able to plot correct orbital paths that can avoid these pieces of metal that are flying by at very high speeds. And it's always a risk to astronauts and to the space station and expensive new satellites. It's always a risk that they may encounter one of these pieces of space junk if it hasn't been well cataloged. There's actually a database of every piece of space junk and every particle we know about, and it's a vast number. And related to that, we also tend to generate light pollution with all of the satellites that we send up. Those Starlink satellites, which are pretty neat because it may offer satellite internet service to the entire world, has a downside, and that is they reflect sunlight back down on the Earth. And so people who like to look at the night sky and like to take astrophotographs, amateur astronomers and professional astronomers alike, they are negatively impacted by light pollution caused by items that we send up into space in large numbers. But as far as cars and factories and that type of thing, not so much.
Well, light pollution is an issue, though. It's
It
an
certainly
issue.
is. Yeah.
In fact, just mentioning light pollution, I wanted to call your attention to something that's going to happen later on this month. On April 23rd, we're going to do a program about light pollution. We will be showing you a movie that was filmed here at the Chabot Space and Science Center, among many other places. And it was produced by a guy who's currently in Singapore producing his next movie. And it is all about light pollution and how it affects not only astronomy, but how it affects wildlife and how it affects safety and how it affects your health. It's a very good movie. It's very well made. And, the best part of it is both Richard and I are in it. So, that's something to look forward to. We're going to be showing that on the 23rd of April, starting at 7:00, and we will have the producer of the movie will be joining Richard and I for some Q&A sessions. So, it's a very good movie. It's great because it doesn't just look at light pollution from the perspective of astronomers who want to be able to see the night sky, but it also really points out the issues that you have with poor lighting efficiency, lighting that we mistakenly think brighter is better when in fact it will demonstrate that that is not the case. And also a lot about how it affects birds and other wildlife in ways you would not expect. So you want to be sure to join us on the 23rd to see that movie.
All right. Well, I don't see any other questions for tonight. There's good
Okay.
group tonight. Good list of questions we had tonight. I appreciate that.
All right. Well, I thank everybody. And I want to remind you a couple of things. First of all, tomorrow night we have our virtual telescope program. we will hopefully be putting a camera on our telescope here at Chabot Space and Science Center and showing you some of those cool things that are up in the sky right now. And tomorrow night is kind of a special night. It's what we call Yuri's night. It'll be the what is it, the 35th anniversary, I think it is, of the flight of Yuri Gagarin, the first human to orbit the Earth, the first person to go into space. And we celebrate every year on a night we call Yuri's Night. The actual anniversary is Monday, the 12th of April. But because we like to party on Saturday nights, we're going to do it tomorrow night. So you want to be sure to join us for that. We'll have some interesting things for you to look at while we do that. The other thing I want to remind you again is Chabot Space and Science Center is still trying to produce programming like this. We're still getting the facility ready for our reopening later on this year. We do need revenue to support all of that. And since the museum itself is closed, we are relying much more right now on donations. So if you take a moment to click on that donate button on the Facebook page, or go to the Chabot Space and Science Center website. It's chabotspace.org, and you'll see a donate button there, and click on that and help us out. We would really appreciate it. All right?
Great.
With that?
So in preparation for Yuri's night, Gerald, dos vidania.
Dos vidania.
Thank you all.